Ladies and gentlemen, the House of Windsor has just been rocked by a decision so bold, so unexpected, that it has left the entire royal establishment reeling. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, the late Queen's most trusted daughter, the woman who has spent a lifetime protecting the Crown's deepest secrets, has spoken. And what she has done will change the future of the monarchy forever. In a private meeting that sources close to the palace say lasted less than 40 minutes, Princess Anne formally named Catherine, Princess of Wales, as the future owner and steward of the Queen's most cherished private estate. Not Balmoral, not Windsor. The one place the late Queen Elizabeth II considered truly hers, her sanctuary, her heart, her lasting legacy beyond the public crown. And the reaction from Camilla's side of the family? Pure, unfiltered fury. This is not rumor. This is not tabloid speculation. Multiple independent sources inside royal circles confirmed the same explosive details. Tonight, we bring you the full story of how Princess Anne drew a line in the sand, how she sidelined years of quiet maneuvering by the Queen consort relatives, and why Catherine now stands as a chosen guardian of the late Queen's most personal inheritance. Let us begin at the beginning. For decades, the late Queen Elizabeth II maintained a strict separation between the properties that belonged to the Crown and those that belonged to her as a private individual. The public knew of Buckingham Palace, of Windsor Castle, of the official residences. But there was always one place she guarded more fiercely than any other, the private estate she treated as a true family home, away from the glare of state duty. It was there she rode, walked her beloved dogs, spent quiet Christmases, and made the most personal decisions of her long reign. It was never intended to become a bargaining chip in the new reign's power games. When the Queen passed in September 2022, the formal machinery of succession transferred the Crown estates and official residences to King Charles. But the private estate remained in a more delicate position. Legal ownership structures, long-established trusts, and the late Queen's own carefully worded intentions left room for interpretation. For nearly 4 years, quiet discussions continued behind closed doors. Who would ultimately hold the keys? Who would decide its future use? Who would protect the late Queen's personal vision for the land and the house that meant more to her than any palace? Enter Camilla's family. According to those familiar with the internal dynamics, certain relatives of the Queen consort began positioning themselves airily. Soft suggestions were made about shared stewardship. Gentle inquiries were floated about modernizing the estate's management. There were whispers of involving extended family members in advisor roles, of opening parts of the property to new commercial ventures that would benefit a broader circle. Nothing was ever said too loudly. Everything was framed as helpful, practical, and in the spirit of a new reign. But Princess Anne was watching, and Princess Anne does not forget, and has always been different. She is a working royal who never sought the spotlight, the one who carried out more engagements than almost anyone, the daughter who understood her mother's mind better than most. She knew what the private estate represented. It was not simply land or a house. It was a late Queen's private refuge, the place where the weight of the crown could be set down for a few precious hours. To allow it to become entangled in the ambitions of another branch of the family was, in Anne's view, a betrayal of that trust. Sources say the decisive moment came after a series of private conversations in the early months of 2026. Catherine had already proven herself, time and again, as the steady, quietly determined figure the monarchy needed. Her recovery from illness, her return to public duties, her careful handling of her children's future, and her consistent respect for the late Queen's values had not gone unnoticed. Princess Anne saw in Catherine something rare, a woman who understood that some things are not for sale, not for leverage, and not for redistribution among relatives who arrived later in the story. The meeting itself was held at a discreet location, away from the main royal residences. Only a handful of people were present. Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Those who had worked with her for decades describe her manner as calm, precise, and final. She laid out the late Queen's documented wishes regarding the private estate. She referenced specific conversations held years earlier. And then she stated, without ambiguity, that Catherine, Princess of Wales, will be named as the principal owner and long-term steward. The legal instruments were prepared. The necessary signatures were arranged. The decision was formalized. Word traveled fast. Within hours, the news reached the Queen consort circle. The reaction was immediate and intense. Family members who had expected a more collaborative arrangement were said to be stunned. Some expressed open disbelief. Others, according to insiders, spoke of overreaching favoritism. There were reports of heated private exchanges, of phone calls that lasted deep into the night, of questions demanded and answers refused. One source close to the Camilla side described the mood as incandescent. Another used a single word, furious. Why does this matter so deeply? Because the private estate is not just another property. It carries emotional weight that no other royal residence can match. For the late Queen, it was home in the purest sense. For Princess Anne, protecting its future under Catherine's care is an act of loyalty to her mother's memory. For Catherine, it is both an honor and a profound responsibility, one she is said to have accepted with characteristic grace and seriousness. King Charles's position remains carefully measured. As monarch, he holds ultimate authority over many aspects of the family's affairs, yet the private nature of this particular estate gave Princess Anne significant standing. Those close to the king suggest he has chosen not to intervene publicly, preferring to allow the formal process to stand. Whether this reflects quiet agreement or strategic distance is a question only those inside the innermost circle can answer, and they are not speaking. What is clear is the message this decision sends. The late Queen's closest daughter has looked at the next generation and chosen Catherine, not as a political statement, not as a rebuke, but as a deliberate act of continuity. In naming the Princess of Wales, Princess Anne has placed the estate in the hands of the woman most likely to preserve its character, its privacy, and its meaning for decades to come. Camilla's family, however, sees it differently. To them, the move feels like a closing of doors. Opportunities they believed were open have been shut. Influence they hope to exercise has been redirected. The fury is real, and it is personal. In the days since the decision became known in royal circles, the atmosphere has been described as tense. Public appearances continue with polished smiles. Official statements remain non-existent. But behind the scenes, the consequences are still unfolding. Some within Camilla's extended family are said to be exploring every possible avenue of discussion. Others have gone silent, waiting to see how far the new arrangement will reach. Catherine herself has made no public comment. Those who know her say she understands the weight of what has been placed in her hands. She knows the late Queen's love for the estate. She knows Princess Anne's absolute commitment to protecting it. And she knows that accepting this role means stepping more fully into the role of guardian, not only of a physical place, but of a living memory. Princess Anne has always been the royal who preferred action to words. In this case, her action has spoken louder than any speech could. By naming Catherine, she has drawn a clear line. The private estate of the late Queen will remain under the care of those who shared the late Queen's values most closely. The rest of the family must now decide how to live with that decision. And Camilla's relatives, still reeling from the shock, show no sign of quiet acceptance. This is only the beginning of the fallout. The full implications for the future of the monarchy's private holdings, for the balance of influence within the family, and for the public image of the modern crown are only starting to emerge. Stay with us, because what happens next may redefine the House of Windsor for a generation. The fury that erupted after Princess Anne's decision did not stay confined to quiet drawing rooms. Within 48 hours, the private estate itself became the center of a silent storm. Staff who had served the late Queen for decades reported an unusual level of tension. Phone calls arrived at odd hours. Visitors who had never previously shown interest in the estate's day-to-day management suddenly requested courtesy tours. And one particularly pointed message, according to two separate sources, came from a senior member of Camilla's extended family, a request for a formal meeting to clarify the late Queen's true intentions. Princess Anne declined. She did not offer explanations. She did not open negotiations. She simply restated what had already been formalized. Catherine, Princess of Wales, held a controlling interest in the long-term stewardship. The legal papers were signed. The trust had been adjusted. The matter, in Anne's eyes, was closed. But nothing in the modern royal family is ever truly closed. Insiders describe a series of increasingly strained conversations that followed. Some members of Camilla's circle framed their objections in practical terms. They spoke of shared family heritage, of the need for inclusive stewardship, and of the risk that concentrating ownership in one branch of the family could create future division. Others were less diplomatic. One relative is said to have remarked that the decision felt like a deliberate exclusion, a message that the Queen Consort's family would never be fully trusted with the late Queen's most personal legacy. Catherine, for her part, remained composed. Those closest to her say she understood the weight of the appointment from the first moment. She did not celebrate. She did not issue statements. Instead, she began the quiet work of understanding every detail of the estate, its history, its staff, its seasonal rhythms, and the very specific wishes the late Queen had expressed about how it should be preserved. In private, she is reported to have told a trusted aide that she saw the role not as a prize, but as a duty she would never take lightly. The contrast could not have been sharper. On one side, a Princess of Wales who approached the responsibility with solemn care. On the other, a circle of relatives who felt doors slamming shut. King Charles' silence continued to fuel speculation. Palace sources insist the monarch was fully informed of Princess's decision before it was finalized. Some claim he offered no objection because he recognized the strength of her position and the clarity of their mother's documented wishes. Others suggest more complex calculation. By allowing the matter to stand, Charles avoided open conflict with his sister while also distancing himself from the sharper edges of the dispute. Whatever the truth, the public saw only the usual polished appearances. Behind the scenes, the temperature remained high. Then came the first visible sign of the rift. A planned family gathering at the private estate, traditionally a low-key occasion that had always included a wider circle, was suddenly scaled back. Invitations that had been expected by certain members of Camilla's family never arrived. When questions were raised, the official explanation was operational reasons. Few believed it. The message was unmistakable. The estate's new steward would decide who crossed the threshold and on what terms. Camilla herself is said to have maintained a careful public neutrality. Those who know her describe a woman skilled at navigating difficult family dynamics without open confrontation. Yet even the most discreet accounts acknowledge that the Queen Consort was deeply unsettled by the intensity of her relative's reaction. One source close to her circle put it bluntly: she understands loyalty. She also understands that some battles, once started, are hard to stop. Meanwhile, Princess continued her work with characteristic focus. She made no further public comments. She simply ensured that every practical step required to transfer effective control to Catherine was completed without delay. Land management plans were reviewed. Long-serving staff were reassured. Security arrangements were quietly updated. The estate that had been the late Queen's private refuge was being placed, piece by piece, into the hands of the woman and believed would protect it best. For Catherine, the responsibility brought both honor and pressure. She is said to have spent long hours studying the late Queen's personal notes about the estate, small details about preferred walks, favorite views, and the particular way certain rooms should be kept. In one private conversation, a close friend reportedly asked her how she felt about controversy surrounding the decision. Catherine's reply was simple: "The late Queen trusted Princess and has trusted me. That is enough." The wider royal household watched carefully. Younger members of the family took note of the firmness with which it had acted. Older courtiers recognized a familiar pattern of a princess royal who had never been afraid to draw hard lines when she believed the late Queen's legacy was at stake. And outside the family, the first discreet briefings began to reach selected journalists, enough to ensure that the story would eventually surface, carefully shaped, in the public domain. What no one could ignore was the deeper significance. By naming Catherine Princess and had done more than settle a question of property. She had made a statement about continuity, about values, and about who she believed best represented the late Queen's private world. In doing so, she had also drawn a clear boundary around one of the most emotionally charged pieces of the royal inheritance. Camilla's family, still furious, now faced a difficult choice. They could accept the decision and adjust to a reduced role, or they could continue to press for influence and risk a more public rupture. Early indications suggest the anger has not cooled. Private discussions continue. Legal questions have been raised, though so far without formal challenge. And the possibility of a lasting chill between certain branches of the family remains very real. As the weeks pass, the private estate itself stands quiet and unchanged, its fields, its woods, its familiar rooms still carrying the imprint of the woman who loved them most. Yet everything around it has shifted. Catherine now holds a responsibility. Princess and has enforced a decision. And Camilla's relatives continue to absorb the shock of a door that, once closed, shows no sign of reopening. The House of Windsor has weathered many storms. This one, born from a single decisive act by the Princess Royal, may prove to be one of the most revealing of the new reign. Because in the end, it was never only about land ownership. It was about loyalty, memory, and the quiet power of a daughter who refused to let her mother's most personal legacy become a prize to be shared among those who arrived later. The story is far from over. The consequences will continue to unfold in the months and years ahead. But one fact is already settled. Princess Anne has spoken. Catherine has been named. And the Queen's private estate has a new guardian.